The religious have problems, we already know that. I honestly don't know why they bother to try to defend their beliefs at all, if it's all just faith and fifis talking, but I think they know that they're losing and they have to at least try. Sadly, they fail miserably, and then they have to make excuses for why they do that because they can't accept that they're actually losing. Ignore the evidence, baldly rationalize and lie a lot, and we're going to see one of the biggest liars out there in Christianity today. So, stick around. So, I was kind of talking to Allison over on the blog, and we agreed that I'm never going to find a decent apologist, a theologian, a believer of any kind that is ever going to have more than, but I really just want it to be true. I'm never going to find one of those people because those people simply don't exist. I'm just going to keep looking since I don't like to give up, and I don't want anyone to have any cause to accuse me of not being serious about trying to find one. I am. I just don't hold out much hope that they're actually there. Therefore, I decided to look at some older apologists that we've largely given up on to see what they're doing. And this time it's Greg Kuchel at Stands Against Reason in a podcast. If Christianity is true, why is it so hard to defend? Well, it's pretty obvious if you think about it. Your first premise is simply false. But Greg has some stuff to say on that, so let's get into it.
Now, the first one comes from Shane, and I'm going to follow it by another one from Deb because they are very similar. So Shane asks, is apologetics not the opposite of what one would find in the one truth? This is a lot of work.
And that's kind of the problem, isn't it? Because if it was actually true, then it shouldn't be so hard, at least in the broad strokes. You should be able to point us to the evidence that you say exists to prove that your religion is true. At least for the basic claims of Christianity, that's really all it should take. Instead, you have to rationalize your way around the facts, making empty claims and appealing to blind faith because you really want it to be true. If I claim that a rock exists, I just have to go and pick up the rock. Here it is. Here's the evidence that you need to demonstrate that the rock is real. If you want to prove a God is real, you should be able to do the same thing in general terms. There it is. Go look at it. This is how I came to the conclusion, rationally, that it really exists. Now, it may not be that easy, granted, but there still ought to be some way that you can show how you came to that conclusion. If I want to show you an atom, I can take you to an electron microscope. Where is your God microscope? Where is anything that you can point at that we can just examine your claims without having to believe in them first? The hard work is in the bullshit. It's not in the evidence since you have none.
And then Deb asks, great website, but is it true? If it was, would you have this website?
I'm not really sure that's a good question, but sure, we'll go with it. Again, we're back to why can't you do the simple stuff for the basic claims instead of having to run around with the goalposts all the time? For some of the more complex stuff, maybe, but for the stuff that ought to convince people on a surface level, why not? There's a God. Ought to be relatively easy. Maybe it's a little harder to prove that Jesus rose from the dead, but you ought to be able to show that Jesus existed at all, right? Then getting into some of the theological weeds, yeah, that might take more work. But where's the stuff that gets you to the basic points? Why does it take so much work to get you there? Establish that you have the slightest clue first in a way that doesn't require faith and fee-fees. After that, if you've done a good job, then we can talk about the rest.
Well, let me respond to Shane first, because could you just read it one more time?
Let me respond to this guy. Wait, what did he ask? All right, I know I'm being critical. let's let her repeat the question. But that sounds like he wasn't paying a lot of attention, doesn't it? Maybe he just needs time to formulate a BS answer. I don't know. So let's be patient and let her get through it one more time.
Shane.
Is apologetics not the opposite of what one would find in the one truth? This is a lot of work.
It's really not. The basics about the world are really simple. Here we are, look at stuff, do stuff, experiment, make observations. If you want to know if matter exists, I will throw a rock at your head. Maybe not really hard, since we want to have a conversation, but you can test for the existence of stuff by interacting with the stuff. The very basics are easy, because there it is. Granted, the more complex we get, the more difficult it gets, because it's not really as simple as, well, here's a thing. It all breaks down to, at its very core, there's stuff, let's experiment and see how that stuff interacts. Now, do that with any of your claims. Where is the basic building blocks of Christianity that anyone can interact with and test for themselves? Science is based on observation. Religion is not. In fact, religion is based on trying to explain the things that we can't observe, the things that are not emotionally comforting enough when we actually do observe them. It's not about trying to find answers, it's about trying to find comfort. That's not a worthwhile idea, at least in my opinion.
Okay. Why is science necessary to find the one truth about the world? Because it's a lot of work.
It was a lot of work for you to just get there. Now, I'm not saying you can't work toward a complex goal, but if everything is complex, then how do you show that you have any truths to begin with? Greg wants to claim that Christianity is true, but he can't actually back any of it up in any demonstrable way. The simplest truths should be the most trivial to demonstrate, but he has nothing that he can demonstrate at all. All he's really got is, but my book says a thing, and then he just asserts that his book is true because he really wants it to be. But how do you demonstrate that? Then we just get down to hearing voices in his head and how he feels, and it just spirals down into oblivion from there. Where is the simple stuff? Where's the stuff that anyone can examine? Come back when you've got that stuff, Greg, because your desperation to get around having those simple, demonstrable, verifiable answers for anything, that's only hurting you and making you look dumb.
So there's a parallel to me. I'm not sure why it seems that, why it's somehow a, I'm trying to think of the best way to characterize this, why it would seem a mark against an effort to find the truth that it's a lot of work.
I'm not sure if he's just BSing or if he's just being completely incoherent. Both are pretty common with Greg Kuchel. Are we supposed to think that he came to the table without any thought about the question? Now, maybe that's just how this podcast works. I don't know. This is just another instance where it starts in the middle of a word or a sentence or whatever, in the middle of a concept, and we don't actually have a clue about the ground rules. But I do think that's kind of silly, don't you? So with that in mind, that maybe there's something here that we're just not understanding, and that's a fair point. I'm not going to say we understand what's going on. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. We return to my questions. I'm not saying that some difficulty isn't expected as you get into the more complex parts of your theology. I'm asking why you have nothing that you can actually demonstrate is true for any of it. And I bet we're not going to get an answer to that, are we?
Because there are a lot of aspects of truth that are important, setting aside religious issues, that are a lot of work. The nature of the task is difficult. What we are looking at here, for example, is do we have reason to believe in God?
Good question. Now, how are you going to present evidence for the existence of your God that is going to convince people who aren't already desperately trying to get there? The problem with religion is that there's no actual reason, only an emotional desire to get to something out there. But that doesn't make it real. It's why we have so many problems with the religious, because they can't show that there's any such thing as a God. Maybe it'll take work to get to your specific God. I'll grant that. But how do you get to any God using evidence of any kind? This is why religion looks like such a scam, right? If you look at scams, they are all ridiculously complex. It's a web of lies aimed at keeping the regular person from ever being able to untangle it all. They've always got an explanation to throw at you, but that explanation is never defensible on its own. It's just something else that you just have to believe. And this is why religion is nothing at all like science, because science, the very basics of science, are eminently simple. There it is. Go look at it for yourself. Whereas religion is never like that. Even there's the Bible. You have to accept on faith that the Bible is worth something. The second that you get to faith, the entire proposition becomes ludicrous. Truth doesn't have to rely on faith. Truth relies on facts. And the religious have no facts, do they? They only have wishful thinking. It's why Greg is just floundering around like an idiot. Because Greg is a con man.
Why would someone think that that truth, if it were true, would be so self-evident that it wouldn't require any work?
Because most truths are at least generally self-evident in some way. You get to complexity, sure, but the simple bits are very easy to see. Why is Greg trying so hard to get away from that reality? Because he has no interest in reality at all. He just wants to believe, and he wants people to send him money, which is why he's been running this scam for years. There needs to be an explain it like I'm five moment, and religion doesn't have one. It has, well, it seems to me, and then running off with the goalpost while the scam artists explain what they think is really going on without ever being able to back any of it up. If you want to see what I mean, take two religions, and it doesn't matter which two they are. Pick two that you like, or dislike, or whatever, and ask both of them the exact same question. Both will answer that question from their own self-serving perspective. They will tell you what they think is true. Neither one is going to have any evidence whatsoever to back their claims up, but both are going to spin you a fairy tale and insist that it's true because that's what they want to believe is true. But that doesn't make any of it true, does it? And that's what we're supposed to be trying to get to, right? You know, truth? Maybe you should come up with some.
Now, let me qualify that, because actually, I think the vast majority of theists think that it's so obvious it doesn't require much work.
That's the faith part. It's just not impressive. Because here's the difference with science, and remember, he brought it up, not me. But when a scientist says, here's something that is true, they can present evidence for other people who don't already believe it, to go and do their own experiments themselves, such that their findings are independently corroborated in some way. Or not. Remember back to Pons and Fleischmann making claims about cold fusion? They released their experimental data, and scientists all over the world tried to verify their findings. It just turned out that they were wrong. Cold fusion, at least their cold fusion, it didn't work. Back to the drawing board. So how do we take what the religious say and run independent experiments to see if what they are saying is actually true? We can't. We can neither confirm nor deny their claims because their claims are not justifiable. Just because they've conned a bunch of gullible dumbasses into believing it, that doesn't make it true. And I remember way back when there were cold fusion fanboys who were just running around making plans for all the stuff we'd be able to do when cold fusion just hit the market. It's going to be cheap and it's going to be wonderful. Just because you believe it, that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't make it true, and the truth is all that matters. So this is not remotely impressive, not one bit.
Look around you. Look at the origin of the universe.
That doesn't tell you anything at all about a God. This is the problem. This is what they always get wrong. I don't get it doesn't mean God done it. You have to come up with a way to bridge that gap. You need evidence to show that a God actually exists and demonstrably did anything. You can't just assert it, which is all the religious are doing. You have to be able to demonstrate it. They just really want to believe. This is why it seems to me is so meaningless. So what? How it seems to you doesn't prove what's actually going on. It only panders to your own childish emotional state, not to reality, which is all that really matters. It's why these people wind up looking so stupid. Because they are.
Look at all the order and the design and the teleology. Things are seen to be made for purposes that even, like the atheist Richard Dawkins claims.
How it seems to you doesn't matter at all. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that you're right. We can give all of that to him just for funsies. It doesn't mean that a God is responsible. It doesn't mean that his God is responsible. Just because he really wants it to be true, that doesn't make it true. I spend a lot of time trying to explain this to the religious and sadly to other people, and they can't get any of this through their heads because they don't care. Their God is the answer that they want to reach. Therefore, that's the answer they're going to insist is real because they just want it to be real. It's why faith is so utterly worthless, because it's not a search for truth, it's a search for comfort. They just really want to believe. It doesn't matter how much you try to show the religious the rational error of their ways. They don't give a damn. They just want it to be true, whether it is or not. And that's not going to get them anywhere worthwhile, is it?
The biological world is a complex world which seems to be designed for a purpose, or appears to be designed for a purpose.
I don't give a damn what Dawkins says. That said, though, I don't recall a place where Dawkins ever said what Greg is claiming that he said. I could be wrong because, as I said, I don't really care about Dawkins or anybody else. But generally speaking, Dawkins has maintained over the years that nothing in nature has an intelligent purpose, period. I wouldn't put it past Greg to just lie about it or to misquote Dawkins, but if anybody knows of any specific quotes that we can look at, something that you can link directly to, that would be great. I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying it's false. I'm just saying I am not aware. There is a difference between saying it looks like it might be interpreted as having a purpose and, well, this has a purpose. And I don't trust Greg farther than I can throw him to know the difference between the two. This is a point that I've made many times before too. There's a difference between the interpretation of purpose and actual purpose. It comes down to, well, it just seems to me, and as we all know, that means nothing. This is another reason we have to take the individual out of it, because it's those personal interpretations that get in the way of actually understanding reality. I'm only concerned about what is really going on. I don't give a damn how Greg feels about it.
He'll even acknowledge that. So in the question of God, I don't think is that hard.
I'd like to see where he acknowledges that, since I've never seen it, although I don't really care. I don't keep up on Dawkins. I don't really care what he says, whatever. But you're still just sprinting towards your emotional goal without paying any attention whatsoever to actual evidence. Even if there was a demonstrable purpose to anything, and there isn't, but even if there was, that doesn't mean God done it. You've got a lot of steps in the middle to fill in and a lot of evidence to present, and the religious have absolutely no means whatsoever to do so. Because this is the difference between science and religion, as we were talking about before. science actually has to fill in those steps. It actually has to provide that evidence. Religion just pretends like they don't exist. Well, of course my God is real. It just becomes the automatic answer to anything they don't understand or don't like, and that's not how rational inquiry works. You actually have to be able to prove it. Your faith means absolutely nothing. But the religious can't get that through their heads, can they?
Well, then why are you apologists working so hard at it? Because atheists deny what seems to be obvious and raise a lot of kinds of challenges and everything that then require an answer.
Obvious to you, because it's certainly not obvious to us, because we aren't starting with the unjustified assumption that God exists. You are. You are not trying to establish any of this as factually correct, as evidentially supported. It just makes you feel good, and you don't actually care about the truth. You just really want it to be true, so you just declare it true and think, well, that proves it's true. Job done. But that doesn't impress anybody else, though, which is why you need to take a massive step backwards and realize that God done it is not the foregone conclusion that you desperately wish that it was. You need to walk us through those steps. And you can't, because you've never been through those steps on your own. You just leapt to the conclusion because you desperately wanted it to be true. But that's not good enough.
I don't think the conclusion that God exists is a hard one to come to.
Not if you're being irrational, which the religious are. If you got a dozen theists together of varying faiths, they would all come to their own different conclusions. The Muslim would say Allah did it, the Christian would say God did it, and the Hindu would pick one of their gods. We're asking how any of you actually got there, and none of them will have any convincing answers. It's faith and fifis all the way down. We are looking for facts and evidence, and they don't have any. Just assigning an answer because that answer makes you feel good, that doesn't make that answer true. We are looking for true, not comfort. It's no wonder Greg is so clueless, because he doesn't have a brain in his head. He's just been programmed to say, God done it, to any question he has, because Greg is a moron.
This is why atheism is extremely rare in the world.
Not so much. Because if you look at Europe, a lot of countries there are majority atheist. Atheism is the fastest growing quasi-religious demographic out there. It's only been rare because assholes like Greg have just murdered atheists and worked to destroy their lives for centuries. Now that they can't shut us up, we're winning and the religious are losing. In the past decade or so, at least according to Pew, Christianity has dropped from 77% of Americans down to 65%. And that was a study from 2019. And at the same time, the religiously unaffiliated, i.e. atheists, rose from 17% to 26%. A quarter of the American population is not rare. Greg is an idiot. By 2070, if things continue as they are, again according to Pew, Christians will be down to about 35% of the population, and atheists will be in the clear majority. And honestly, I don't think it's going to take that long. I might even see it in my lifetime. And I think that would be great.
And it's not, I think, a matter of massive indoctrination. We have all kinds of different variations of religious views, but virtually all of them entail the belief in an extra material realm, and many of them entail a belief that someone is in charge.
Beliefs don't make facts. This honestly shouldn't be that hard to understand, but for people like Greg, clearly it is. If there was one thing that I see consistently among the religious, it's the inability to understand that just because they really want it to be true, that doesn't mean that it is. For the majority of theists who show up in the channel, they will make claims of, well, of course my beliefs are true. Really? Prove it. Produce your evidence that shows that your beliefs are actually true. Go ahead. But of course my beliefs are true. They just can't get beyond that claim. In fact, a lot of them get really mad about being asked for independent evidence, like we're calling them a liar or something for expecting more than just their say-so. They are emotionally attached to their beliefs, but their emotional attachment doesn't make their claims true. They just don't care.
Of both material and extra material realm. This is so completely obvious to everybody that they think it's foolish to deny it.
Obviously, it isn't obvious to everyone, or we wouldn't be asking you to defend yourself. Of course, people like Greg can't understand that everybody isn't just like he is. In fact, I see a lot of theists getting really mad at the mere suggestion that they don't hold the only acceptable position on everything, anywhere. Increasingly, though, more and more people are rejecting the claims of religion, which is why religion is dying. Greg can't accept that, but it is undeniably true. Again, these people don't want to talk to us, so they can continue to lie to themselves about the state of actual reality. How pathetic is that?
Now, that doesn't mean that the atheists are wrong and all religious people are right in some measure. It just means that that doesn't seem hard to most people to believe in an extra material realm and a God who runs it.
Your opinions don't matter. There was a point where it wasn't hard for most people to imagine that the earth was flat. They were just all wrong. There was a time when it was obvious to most people that the sun went around the earth. They were wrong too. There was a time when the majority thought that the earth was the center of the universe. Now, we know just how insignificant it is in the grand scheme of things. People are wrong all the time. That's why we don't care what's obvious to anyone. We care what is demonstrably and defensibly true. And Greg doesn't give a damn, because Greg is an idiot.
That seems to be easy. And there are reasons for that that are obvious and at hand. The origin of the universe. Big Bang needs a Big Banger. That doesn't take a master's degree in anything. Doesn't even take a bachelor's degree. It's common sense.
And common sense means nothing. This is exactly why we're not impressed with the religious. They are anti-intellectual. They are anti-evidence. It doesn't matter what seems to me. It matters what is actually true. Your feelings and your desires and your common sense are worthless if they do not accurately describe the demonstrable state of the reality that we all share. And they don't. This is why Greg is such a laughingstock, because he's not at all concerned with the facts. He's just looking for emotional comfort, and that is positively childish. This entire podcast thing is just laughable, and we're only about halfway through it, because Greg doesn't have the slightest grasp on reality. So let's get a little bit farther before we give up for the week, because I'm starting to remember why I don't bother with morons like Greg Kukl very often. Sadly, there really isn't anyone better, is there?
Now, that may not be true, but it is a common sense notion. A design needs a designer. Okay? Moral law needs a moral lawgiver. Okay? Well, these are pretty straightforward notions.
Except you've just spun every single one of them specifically so that you can apply your emotionally comforting wishes and dreams onto them, because that's what you want to be true. There is no demonstrable design. You just desperately want there to be a designer, so you are choosing to interpret things as designed just so you can get there. We know how morals actually work. But you're not happy with that. You really want an invisible father figure in the sky to just control everything, so you are choosing to interpret morality as you do, whether it's defensible or not. They are starting with the conclusion that they really, really like for emotional reasons, and then just backtracking to try to get somewhere emotionally comforting because that was their goal the whole time. This is not a search for truth. This is a search for comfort. A search for truth doesn't care where you end up, as long as you get to the destination of truth. So long as the conclusions reached rise rationally from the evidence and observations along the way. And Greg doesn't want to do any of that. He is not remotely concerned. He's just trying to run home to Papa because that's what makes him feel really good. Well, too bad. What makes you feel good doesn't have anything to do with the truth. But since he and other theists are only concerned with their feelings, they entirely give up the search for truth because the actual truth doesn't stroke their egos. This is a them problem. It always has been and it always will be. Sad, isn't it? So anyway, what do you think so far? Granted, we're probably leaving them in the middle of a thought. That happens sometimes, but that's just going to make the SUPERCUT fans happy somewhere down the road. Has Greg said anything remotely coherent yet? Or is this just, but I really, really want to believe it, writ large? That seems to be pretty much all he's capable of, right? So we'll pick it up right here next time, and hopefully, he won't be quite so ludicrous then, but come on, this is Greg Kuchel we're talking about. He's a moron through and through. I don't think he's capable of setting his emotions aside and just thinking. But I guess we'll see. I wouldn't be betting the farm on it or anything, but, hope springs eternal, I guess. Why do the religious bother to defend their beliefs when they have no actual evidence to support it? That's the question we're here today to answer, and sadly, we have to rely on Greg Kuchel, and we all know just how useless he is. Still, let's give him a shot, because even a broken clock is right twice a day, although in Greg's case, that's probably an overestimate. So, onward, fair viewers, onward into oblivion. We're back today with Greg Kuchel and Amy. No idea what her last name is, but it's part of their podcast where he's trying to explain things badly, as if that's remotely a surprise. Greg doesn't understand much, but he certainly has his hand out for your money, doesn't he? So let's jump right into part 2 and see if Greg is any better here. I don't think you should be expecting a whole lot. This is Greg Kuchel we're talking about, but let's see anyhow. I want to give him a fair shake.
All I'm appealing to is the common sensibility of it that's accessible to the average person.
Except common sense is not the same thing as being factually true. This is why they use it, though, because they are looking for emotional comfort, which common sense appeals to, not demonstrable fact, which it just doesn't. Anyone appealing to common sense is an idiot. Common sense is often just wrong. That's the problem. We can point to all kinds of examples, and I've done that plenty of times in the past, where things people believe on common sense are just laughably false. Lightning never strikes in the same place twice. Well, yes it does. Absolutely it does. Because if it didn't, then lightning rods wouldn't work. You can watch tall structures get struck again and again and again. Why? Because that's how lightning works. And we can go on and on and on and on, all of these common sense beliefs that are just factually incorrect. Greg doesn't care, though, because Greg is an idiot. Greg is only trying to get to his fee-fees, and that is positively childish.
Now, if somebody wants to say, not necessarily, I got it, here's how we can explain how you could have morality without God. Okay, fine, I'll listen. Now what we have is a very complicated and counterintuitive explanation from Darwinian evolution.
Except you don't listen because you don't want it to be true. Trust me, I've had that conversation many, many times with moral realists, both religious and non-religious alike, and they just refuse to listen. They are desperate to believe the things that they take on faith. They desperately want to believe the things that make them happy. They don't want to know the actual reality. They just want the comforting fantasy, and that means absolutely nothing. These are the conversations that we have that go absolutely nowhere because they don't care about the truth. You can present the evidence, and they have a long list of ready excuses for why they couldn't care less about the facts. They just really want to believe. It really is stupid.
That's what's complicated. Or, design. Well, the reason it looks designed is we just happen to be the universe of an infinite numbers that looks the way it is, that produced us, and now we're there to be able to wonder why it looks so unique. The multiverse kind of, or the weak anthropic principle kind of answer.
That's not how I've ever heard it put, but Greg just likes to make stuff up, so that's not really a surprise. See, the problem is that these people, they want to be special. They want to feel like they were intended, when in reality they're not. It's always an emotional thing. They have desires, and those desires do not accurately represent the world in which they demonstrably live. And when you try to explain where they're going wrong, they want nothing at all to do with that. They just desperately want to believe. They are desperately looking for ways to stroke their own egos, and that's just absurd. It's why I call these people immature children, because really that's what they are.
Well, that's what's complicated, seems to me.
But reality is complicated. That's kind of your problem, Greg. You are looking for the most simplistic answer that you can make up in your head that strokes your ego and makes you feel better. You don't care about the actual truth, because the actual truth might not be comforting. You want simple, stupid stuff that floats your boat, but that's not how reality works. Reality is complicated, but you're just not bright enough to work these things out for yourselves. So you just believe what it says in a book, or you believe what some idiot in a dress tells you from the pulpit, and if that gives you a theological woodies, well, it's just gotta be true. This is what these morons are doing wrong. But they don't care, do they? They just really want to believe.
And so if we're going to answer that challenge to the common sense notion, then it's going to take more complication. And I don't think coming to the truth about most things, many things, let's put it that way, is that hard.
Except you're wrong. This is why the religious tend to be largely uneducated, or at least lack advanced degrees, especially in the sciences, because they are trying to make reality into something that it's just not. This is all, but it seems to me nonsense, which is entirely irrelevant, because how it seems to you means absolutely nothing in the real world. It only matters how things are, not how you wish they were. And that's something that's almost impossible to get across to these lunatics, because they don't care. Greg doesn't care. Greg is a con man trying to sell an imaginary solution to a made-up problem to gullible people, and he's been doing that forever. I'm sure he believes it, but he shouldn't. Nobody should. People ought to be rational, and it seems to me just isn't rational. It's dumb. But then again, look at who we're talking about here, right?
But if one is going to kind of disqualify the discipline because it's hard, well, then you're going to have to disqualify science and philosophy and a whole range of other things that are means of knowing truth that are complex, complicated, hard.
See, here's where he's just uprooted the goalposts. He's supposed to be answering, why do Christians have to work so hard to defend Christianity if it's true? Well, actual truth isn't necessarily easy. The simple answer, the very simple answer, is almost always wrong. Yet humans are almost always lazy, and they just want something simple to follow, now and forever, that they don't have to ever think about again, because thinking about stuff is hard. But that doesn't get you to the truth, does it? It gets you to believing in things that are just downright wrong. But because Greg is convinced that Christianity is automatically true, Nothing else matters. It's the hard work to prove it that counts, not the blind faith that the religious have that it's just got to be true because we like it so there. These people have a terrible epistemology, but they don't care and it shows.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Knowledge is work. You have to think hard. You have to think carefully. You have people making a case for all sorts of things. You have different philosophers and people making the case for the philosophy they think is true, the science they think is true. Richard Dawkins has written many books. Does that mean what he believes is false?
And another country heard from. And here's the thing. We're not after what anybody thinks is true, or at least we shouldn't be. We ought to be after what is true, demonstrably, based on the evidence that we have and nothing else. Your feelings don't matter. Science is what the evidence says it is, not what scientists say, what the evidence says. In fact, I can't think of anything worthwhile where that isn't the case. The evidence matters. Only the evidence matters. The people and their feelings, they don't. Yet for the religious, the opposite is true. They don't care about the evidence one bit. They only care about their feelings. They only care about what sounds good to me. And that's downright stupid. It really is. But people like Greg can't admit that. Otherwise, he'd have to go out and get a real job, and he certainly doesn't want to do that, does he?
It doesn't follow, but I think there's something going on here where they're putting religion in a different category from all these other areas of knowledge, and it's just not a fair move.
Well, because it is. It's not a category of knowledge, it's pure fifis and faith. It is fanaticism, not fact. You cannot set all of your wishes and dreams aside and proceed only on the evidence that we have available to us right now. And that's why religion is so laughable. I mean, this is kind of like having a favorite flavor of ice cream. You're certainly welcome to do so. Pick something that tastes good to you. Eat only that flavor if you want. Nobody cares. This isn't a statement about the actual state of factual reality. It's not true in the sense of truth being something that is demonstrable in the real world. It's not like you're saying, well, this is objectively the right flavor of ice cream for everyone. At least you better not be, because you'd just be wrong, because no such things exist. But for religion, that is exactly what they're saying. They have no evidence whatsoever that their religion is true, yet they are stating that it is, confidently, simply because it makes them feel good to think that it's true. But that doesn't make it true. That's what makes religion downright delusional. When you get to positive statements about reality, you have to have a whole lot more than your say-so. And sadly, the religious never do.
We all understand that people argue for what they think is true, and that you have to work to understand and respond to people who object to what you believe. That's just a simple thing that we see all the time.
But it's also up to you to defend what you believe in some objectively verifiable way. Depending on what the discussion is about, of course. I mean, ice cream, who cares? The existence of stuff in reality, that matters, and there is a much higher epistemic requirement to present a credible case. And sadly, they don't have any of that. They are treating this like it is their favorite flavor of ice cream. Well, it tastes good to me. So what? That doesn't mean it tastes good to other people. That doesn't mean that your tastes are the standard by which everyone else has to abide. No, you're just making a fool of yourself. What sounds good to you, what you want to believe, all of that is irrelevant if your claims do not stand up to objective critical scrutiny. This is where your opinions go completely by the wayside. When you start making claims about things that you say exist in objective reality, you gotta back those up. They either do or they don't. And it's your job to support it in a way that convinces other people intellectually that you have the slightest clue what you're talking about. And Greg and this lady, sorry, I think her name is Amy, but they don't have any sense of their own rational responsibilities because they don't care. They just have blind and completely empty faith, and that is not enough.
I think it is easy not to believe in God if you don't look too closely at the nature of reality.
Actually, the opposite is true. If you don't pay any attention to what is actually going on, and if you're willing to just staple "God done it" on everything for emotionally comforting reasons, then theism is simple. It's only when you try to verify things that you run into trouble. And that's what happened to me. I tried to verify the things that I took on faith, and everything started falling apart because I wasn't willing to just gloss over the facts when they conflicted with my prior beliefs, when they got in the way of my faith. When there was a problem, I wanted to know why that problem existed. I didn't say, oh, well, there just isn't really a problem. My beliefs are perfect. There isn't a problem at all. Reality just must be wrong. And then just go on believing what I always had. And that is another important part. I was willing to change my mind on my faith if it turned out that it wasn't supported by the evidence that I had, because I recognized that the evidence was far more important than my faith. So Greg is just wrong again, and what else is new?
It's easy not to believe in God. Oh, I don't see him, so he's not there.
Yes, get rid of faith. That's the whole point of having a rational epistemology. You don't just assume things are true because you really want them to be. You want to verify them in some objective way, whereas religion is trying to do exactly the opposite. It believes what it wants to be true and doesn't bother to check out the corroboratory evidence to see if it actually is. Because finding out that you're wrong just might hurt your precious widow Fifi's, and that's childish. Even I, as a newly questioning Christian, I knew that. Why would God lie to us? If God created everything, then why do we not trust the creation to show us the way? Except it doesn't actually work out that way, does it? The ones making all the excuses are the religious because the evidence doesn't actually support their beliefs. It just proves how ridiculous your beliefs are. The more you look at the real world without those rose-colored religious glasses, the more obvious it is that the religious have something to hide. It's why they've got all the excuses. Because the truth doesn't need excuses. It just is what it is. Think about that one for a while. Let's see if you come up with anything interesting.
It's a very, very simple, straightforward, epistemic approach. I don't see him, so he's not there. I'm not belittling that. I'm just saying that seems to be the way a lot of people who are atheists approach it.
Yes, facts first, faith never. That's how people approach everything else in life, except religion. Religion is the special circumstance, right? But it shouldn't be. There should be no double standards. If the standard that we have, the one that works for everything else but not for religion, if that doesn't work, then there's a problem. Religion is that problem. Religion is wrong. They just won't accept it because they don't want to. I'm going to pull this one out of the religious playbook, but it's not a head problem, it's a heart problem. They don't want their heartfelt religious beliefs to be wrong, even if they are. They just can't handle it. This is why they invent the double standard in the first place, because it's the only way they can maintain their ridiculous beliefs. It's why they have all the excuses. This isn't an us problem, it's a them problem. And nobody ought to be surprised at that. Nobody at all.
Some are much more sophisticated, I acknowledge that. But a lot of times when you talk with somebody who's an atheist, they say, well, where is he? I don't see him. That's what they responded. So that's easy to say that. But it's not easy to say that if you look closely at the nature of reality.
It's absurdly easy to do that because there is no evidence for any gods apparent. See, here's the problem that people like Greg and Amy have. They are starting with the preconception that God is real. They just want God to be real. They can't justify it, but they just really want it to be true. Therefore, because they can't ditch their preconceived notions and they're not being remotely rational, everything suddenly becomes evidence for this imaginary God. Well, I don't get it, therefore God done it. It's the same thing, honestly, that Bigfoot people and UFO nuts are doing. Everything is evidence for Bigfoot. Everything is evidence for aliens. Not finding a Bigfoot body is evidence that Bigfoot is real because, reasons. Yeah, reasons. They'll just make it up. They will never admit that these things aren't supported because their entire personal self-concept is based around the idea that they are. These people are lunatics. It's not that hard to understand.
Even a marginally closer look convinces you that effects have causes that are adequate to the effect.
Which doesn't make it a god. It just means you don't know what the cause is. Greg is so convinced that his God is real that he's lost the capacity to be remotely objective about it. Well, of course it's my God. I mean, seriously, listen to these people sometime. You will hear this all the time. Well, what else could it be? A near infinite number of other stuff. The fact is, we don't know, and you don't just get to make shit up. The time to say, God done it, is when you have evidence for that God and the connective tissue that shows that that real God that you've already demonstrated was actually real, was actually responsible. And the religious never have that. They just leap to emotionally comforting conclusions because they wanna. And that's really stupid.
Big Bang needs a big banger, you know? And on and on, like I said. So tell me what Deb had to say. The reason I paused was because Shane's was more clear to me how to respond. I need to think about Deb's.
So Deb's was, great website, but is it true? If it was, would you have this website?
I mean, granted, that is kind of a dumb question. Now, I haven't gone and looked at their website for a very long time, so let's go do that. This is their website on the day that I'm writing this. It probably looks a little bit different today, but it is what it is. I poked around there a little bit, looked at some articles, stuff like that, and nothing on the site actually tries to justify their beliefs. Nothing. It's all, well, because this is true, and then all the stuff that they've just tacked on. If somebody like me, who doesn't believe any of it, went to their website, as I just did, and read all the stuff that I just read, and said, cool claims, dude, now prove it, I'd come away very disappointed because all they've got is, my book says a thing, and I've got faith. And that is not enough. It's just not. Not for anyone rational. But here, Greg is just trying desperately to get away from the rational because he doesn't care about being rational at all. His entire argument is, well, it seems to me because I've got faith. And that is positively idiotic. I honestly don't get people like Greg. I mean, I get them. I kind of was one at one point in time. I know why they're this way, but I don't understand the thought processes that go into it, mostly because I don't think there are any thought processes involved. They don't care about reality. They expect reality to conform to their beliefs, not the other way around. This is not about truth. It's about comfort, and that's really fucking stupid.
I don't understand that.
I think it's just similar, this idea that why do you need a website if it's true? You're obviously just trying to convince us of something false.
Which is a good point, because as I said, their website isn't trying to convince anyone of anything. It isn't presenting evidence for anything. It's just making empty claims that they aren't remotely trying to justify rationally at all. They just really want it to be true. So maybe this is just a malformed question? I don't know. I'm not trying to put words into anyone's mouth. Maybe if I had been the one to ask, I would have said something like, "Why does your website not try to justify your beliefs with evidence?" Because guess what? If you go over to the Flat Earth Society's website, they're doing the exact same thing. Now, that hasn't really been updated for a long time. Their last blog post was 2016, but they're doing the exact same thing, just making claims without actual, fairly evaluated supporting evidence because they really want it to be true. The few places they even try, it's just obviously cherry-picked, just like creationists do. They are not after the truth. They just really want to believe too.
I think it's just the same kind of principle that it shouldn't be hard work
Well,
to
the counterexamples are atheist
right.
websites.
Atheists aren't making positive claims. You are. We're just pointing out how wrong you are, or at least I am, because I don't speak for anybody else. I can't say for anyone else, of course, because I'm not them. I honestly don't go to atheist websites all that often. Now, I'm sure he's going to say something else. We'll get there in a second, but there really is no comparison. Of course, Greg honestly thinks that everyone is just like he is because he can't get out of his own head and look out into the real world from an honest perspective. But let's give him a chance and see where he's going with this, although I don't think it's going to be anywhere worthwhile.
Right.
There are all kinds of atheist websites. There are all kinds of Jesus mythicist websites. There are all kinds of websites about all kinds of things that purport to give information that's true. Some on the religious issue side, like atheism, would be addressing that question, or other issues. It doesn't make any sense to me to suggest that if you have a website trying to show that something is true, this is evidence that the something you're trying to show is true is actually not true.
It took him a while to get there, didn't it? But he's still missing the point. Atheist websites, and I can only go by the ones that I've seen, and like I said, I don't pay a whole lot of attention, but they are not making positive claims about atheism, because atheism is not a positive claim. They are just providing evidence that the crap that the religious say is just bullshit. They are trying to move that crap out of the way just as fast as you people can sling it. And if that's a claim, and it might be, they are providing copious amounts of evidence that what they are saying is actually true. They are showing that the religious are full of crap. Unlike Greg, because he's just running on pure fifis and faith. And I recently heard from a hearing impaired viewer who said that according to YouTube's automated subtitles, that fifis comes across as feces and faith. And yeah, that kind of still works, doesn't it? So thank you so much for writing in. I know that it's hard when you have to rely on YouTube for anything. I just don't have the time to do actual subtitles myself. I wish I could. I've thought about it, but I honestly don't have the time. If anyone else would like to do so, volunteer, that would be great. I would be happy to provide my original scripts if that would help. Although, granted, they aren't always completely accurate because sometimes they just go off into the wild blue yonder, but if anybody wants to volunteer, let's make it happen.
I don't know how else to take that. And I'm
Mhm.
not trying to be uncharitable to Deb, but I just don't know how to take that.
It doesn't really matter because you'd find a way to spin it to your advantage. Because that's really all he's doing here, right? It's all spin. He can't understand why anyone would criticize him. And of course, he's not alone. I've pointed this out many times before on the channel. That these nutball apologists, they have to know that what they're saying is nonsense, given all the times that they have been corrected. Yet they just keep saying the same thing because they can't conceivably be wrong. That would just make them feel bad, and they can't have that. This is what happens when you care only about your feces. And yes, I said feces there on purpose, and not the facts. Because for anyone who's actually rational and cares if anybody comes up to you and says, you're wrong here, 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 and here's why. You actually take that seriously. You examine the evidence that you've been presented with. You stop saying the stuff that's wrong, or at the very least, you engage in a rational back and forth conversation in an attempt to reach the actual truth. And once you think you've got it, then you stop saying the stuff that's wrong and only say the stuff that's true. People like Greg don't do that. They can't. I mean, Greg is a con man trying to sell courses to the gullible idiots with far too much money and not enough brains. But that's true of most of these shyster apologists, right? They're up there on stage with their hands out for your money. They're only doing it for the money. So why is it that a scientist, say, would stop to have an intelligent conversation, assuming they had time and it was worthwhile, and an apologist will just move on because, hell, they already know it all, right? Why the difference in approach? I don't know, but I've talked to a ton of scientists who are always willing to talk shop unless you're a kook, and then I don't blame them. But the religious, they only want to talk to people on their side. Why? Because we don't pay them first, and that's what they're after. And also, it's not emotionally comforting. They don't get anything out of talking to their critics. And if you look at the YouTube channels of these people, they almost, without exception, don't talk to the atheists. They'll talk to the religious, but when atheists come to call, they've got nothing to say to us, do they? It's no wonder people like Greg don't understand anything, because these people just don't care. And that's one of the saddest things ever, isn't it?